All right. I would say we start. My name is Marco Rupp. I work for the Bio-Based Industries Consortium. I would like to warmly welcome you, not only in our name, but also in the name of Zero Waste Europe, because we teamed up again to do some what you hopefully consider good work around food waste. We, as the Bio-Based Industries Consortium, bring partners together from industry and universities and the regions to scale up bio-based innovation across the value chain. So if that's packaging, textiles, chemicals, construction materials, but also food ingredients, that's what we are. You can find more information about us on our website. But the reason we are here is not to talk about us, but about something which is at the heart of Zero Waste Europe and BIC, which is, of course, we want to avoid that food waste is generated at all. But if there are ways that we can avoid and prevent food waste, and particularly in terms of the EU 2030 food waste and climate targets, I think then we need to look at a couple of things. And Zero Waste Europe and BIC has, over the last years, published two reports which actually show that despite the obligation from EU member states to separately collect bio-waste from last year on, from 2024 on, only 20% or only 26% of the kitchen waste is currently captured, with the rest ending up in landfills and being incinerated. And whilst our joint interest was very valid a couple of years ago, if you look what's happening over the last years, I mean, using Europe's resources in a wise way is more imminent and important than ever. And that's why we also think we need to look at all the other options which are out there to increase that food waste and kitchen waste collection. So we looked at extended producer responsibility for food products. That's the study we will hear about here today, because we believe you abbreviate them with EPRs, and for the sake of the discussion today, the EPRs are an option to reach a better share of financial and operational responsibility. That's between the municipalities, the taxpayers, but also those placing food on the EU market. And how that can be done, that's what we want to discuss today. We want to present the study, but we also want to put it in a little bit of a wider context, in a new context. So that's why we have Mirabella from the European Commission with us, who will do some opening words. We have Jean-Marc from Zero Waste Europe with us, who will present the study. And then we will have a Q&A session. For those of you who are not familiar or who are familiar with Zoom, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you find a Q&A box there. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please use that box, type in your questions. We will not give the floor for oral interventions, but we will make sure that any question you put in the Q&A box, we'll come back to that. If it's not in the webinar, we will follow up afterwards. And please tell who you are and what your concrete question obviously is in the Q&A box. So I would like first to give the floor to Mirabella Lupescu. She works in the European Commission. She works in DG Environment. She worked actually for 16 years already in the European Commission in different policy fields, such as regional policy, energy, and climate, as well as circular economy, sustainable production and consumption. She is now in the team in DG Environment, which leads the work on the bioeconomy strategy, and she's mainly in charge of the sustainability and circularity aspects. Mirabella, we're happy, very happy to have you with us here today, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Many thanks, Marco. Many thanks for inviting me here, dear participants. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today at this webinar, co-organized by Zero Waste Europe and the Bio-Based Industry Consortium. I will try, as Marco mentioned, to give you some introductory remarks about the topic of the webinar today, and I will try to frame it as to the importance of improving resource efficiency in Europe, and notably biological resources. And I will start it, let's say, from the beginning, because I think that the Draghi report that was issued 1 year ago mentioned the importance for Europe in today's changing and challenging context to improve not only its competitiveness, but also the material efficiency. I think we cannot afford anymore to be too much reliant on imports, but also we cannot afford to waste very useful resources. And although biomass has never been classified as a critical raw material, I think that biological resources are not only limited, but they do need time to regenerate. So for this reason, I would like to start the few remarks that I want to give today before the presentation of the study and before the discussion on how important, and I think everybody would agree, the circularity and material efficiency is for Europe. Only by increasing the material use rate, we will be able to reach both competitiveness, but also climate goals, while at the same time lessening pressure on ecosystem. This is a broad statement, but it's important to remind it because it has been largely included in this Commission political mandate and work program. Just to give you an example, this is really the fundamental of the competitiveness compass, the clean industrial deal, but also of the recently adopted bioeconomy strategy. And it is the foundation of the upcoming Circular Economy Act on which the Commission is and DG Environment is actually working on. The potential to increase circularity also of biological resources is striking. And I would also like to start with mentioning some figures. I think Marco already mentioned it, and I'm certain that my colleagues will also mention it later on, because some of these figures you can find in the report that will be presented today. But let me mention just some of them, which I find telling. Overall, the material use rate staggers at around 11%, but when we look at biomass specifically, the EU sources over 80% of its biological resources from virgin biomass, while only 11% comes from secondary and a meager 7% from recycled resources. On the other hand, looking at more the residue size, 138 million tons of bio-waste are produced each year in the EU. And as Marco mentioned, only about 1/3 gets to be valorized. Looking at more specifically one of the topic of the discussion today and food waste, you all know that Eurostat figures indicate in 2023 around 130 kilograms of food per person wasted in the EU, with a slight increase over the years. Food waste reduction is key, of course, in European policies, because it is a fundamental to establish sustainable food systems and because the deployment of the circular bioeconomy depends on it. You mentioned the recently commitment from the EU to halve the amount of food waste per capita by 2030. I think you didn't mention, but it's well known that the very recent revision of the Waste Framework Directive proposes new binding targets for member states to reduce food waste by 10% in processing and 30% in retail and consumption. In addition to that, I think Commission also is very much aware of the importance of food waste prevention practices. And I would like here to mention the work that is still going on and led by our colleagues in the Joint Research Center on the EU platform on food losses and food waste, in order to raise the awareness among stakeholders and member states about the importance to reduce the the waste of food. The recently adopted bioeconomy strategy fully acknowledges also the potential of further using biological residues by promoting lead markets in some specific sectors, such as fertilizer, chemicals, materials. We will all work to create mechanisms that can support demand to valorize biological resources from secondary and tertiary streams for higher value uses. Let me give you an example. I mean, we all know that bio-waste is already an interesting feedstock to create biogas through anaerobic digestion. However, co-products such as digestate are not yet fully incentivized to become, for instance, soil improvers or biofertilizers. There are different ways of how one can valorize biological residues. Just to mention some, it can be an important feedstock for precise fermentation. And I know that Marco knows very well this as a member of the bio-based industries consortium. But while technologies exist to treat and put all this feedstock back in the economic circuit, I think, and we will, I mean, you will discuss this today, the challenge is indeed to make sure that efficient prevention and collection systems are in place throughout the EU. In this sense, I think that the upcoming Circular Economy Act, currently in the making, will be indeed instrumental. It aims to accelerate the transition to a more circular economy, increasing the security, competitiveness, decarbonization, but with the main goal to establish this single market for secondary raw material, including for waste from biological origin. For me, there are several ways of looking at this problem and how, you know, you can improve collection and use of existing biological residues, being it bio waste or food waste. We can look at it from downstream perspective. What do we do with the existing waste? How can we improve the existing collection and treatment system in different member states? Or you can look at it from an upstream, more upstream perspective. How can we reduce its sources generation over time? In the bioeconomy strategy, and I would like to mention some of these policy instruments. For instance, we mention indeed the challenge of putting in place the needed infrastructure that can help build economies at scale at local level to valorize this important waste streams. For instance, Horizon Europe will set up a biomass hub project that can monitor existing biomass flows at local and regional level to build economies at scales. Industrial symbiosis is also an interesting tool that can be used to make use of byproducts and residues also from biological origin. In terms of upstream reduction of waste generation, there are several instruments, and of course, economic instruments play a very important role to incentivize the reduction of waste from the onset. It depends on the member states, and there are several taxation policies, but also incentives such as pay-as-you-throw or EPR schemes. Banning landfilling can also be an interesting option, but also promoting circular business models. In this context, I think that the study and Zero Waste Europe will present it shortly. It's important because it helps advance the reflection on which instrument can support EU policies to reduce biological waste generation, including food waste. As you mentioned, Marco, at the beginning, extended producer responsibility schemes are indeed interesting policy instruments that can encourage manufacturers to design environmentally friendly products and engage their responsibility until the end of life. However, their design needs to be appropriate and proportionate to maximize their advantages and to minimize the possible governance, social, or market drawbacks. It is too early to say whether and how EPR will be taken on board in the future EU policy mix, but I think it is important that you look at the different possibilities now and kickstart the discussion today. I really thank you for your attention, and I look forward also to the discussion and the presentation of the study. Thank you.
Thanks, Mirabella. Thanks for those words. I think they framed the context very well. Looking a little bit to the left and the right, what's going on in the terms of initiatives. look at critical enablers for doing that, infrastructure, looking at the opportunities, amongst others, creating industrial ecosystems, and seeing that we need to start somewhere talking about EPRs. And I think the best person to talk about that now is Jean-Marc Simon. He's the founder of Zero Waste Europe. He's been there since 2010, and he is a real champion of zero waste, of the movement, and drive ambitious policies at the European level and also at the national level. Jean-Marc, we're of course very happy to have you here today, and we would like now to hear from you how that study can help and what's in there to kickstart discussions about EPRs and food waste. Jean-Marc, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Marco, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Mirabella, for setting the stage for what I think is a very interesting conversation that we need to have about this potential new topic, that is extended producer responsibility for food products. As Marco said, this is a study that we have done together with the Bio-Based Industries Consortium, and we are very happy to present it to you today. I guess you're seeing my screen, so let's get started. So why extended producer responsibility for food products, first of all, and also like why EPR? As Mirabella has said, there's EPR is a tool that the European Union has been using since quite some time, but it's true that it's quite novel to actually look at EPR for food products, and I think it's a question worth asking ourselves. How come that after 30 years of EPR policies in the EU, this has not been considered? And we can speculate about the reasons, but certainly my point here today is really like, let's look at this with curiosity, and also like, let's see the potential of actually that this tool can have in addressing the problems that Mirabella has presented. So a bit of context, building on what Mirabella has already said, there's around 130 kilograms of food waste per inhabitant in the EU today. Of course, there is food waste, there is food loss that happens further up the stream, basically at the production level. The legal framework, Mirabella has touched on this, but I'll repeat it very quickly. We have the obligation to source separate bio-waste since 2024. We have a recycling target, a general recycling target of 65% by 2035. And this is not related to bio-waste directly, but considering that bio-waste is between 30 and 40% of all municipal solid waste, it will be impossible to meet the 65% recycling target if we not successfully tackle the issue of collection and management of bio-waste. And then there is the target, a 30% food waste target, to reduce 30% of food waste for households by the end of 2030. As explained by Marco and Mirabella, the situation today is that only 1/4 of all this food waste is captured. That means, there's around 60 million tons of bio-waste generated in the EU every year. We're capturing around 15 million. Then there's a situation that, yes, we have a food waste target, but we don't have instruments to do that. I think the member states and the municipalities are doing a great job in trying to put in place mostly voluntary measures. But how do these measures relate to achieving a concrete target? I think it's something that we are missing. And the big question here is, can we achieve such an ambitious target without a proper budget allocation? And that's, I think, the general topic, and the reason why basically we're presenting the study today is that there's a general lack of economic incentives to do the right thing. The right thing being generate new business models that reduce waste generation, put in place practices, education campaigns to do that, separately collect organics, build infrastructure to produce, to compost, biomaterials, biogas, etc. So that's the legal framework. Also, as Mirabella has said, we are in a framework of competitiveness. We have an issue with actually having degraded soils in a region which produces lots of food. So that's and we're suffering from droughts, floods, etc. It's not helping us to actually to have degraded soils if we want to actually be competitive on that front. On the strategic autonomy, phosphorus has been classed as a critical raw material for the EU, which is essential for production of fertilizers, food, pharma, electronics. And again, we are wasting lots of it by actually not properly managing it in the bio-waste sector. There's a bioeconomy strategy that actually has a priority to develop the secondary market for bio-based materials and products. And then there's a circular economy with the Circular Economy Act. And again, I repeat that the 2035 recycling targets cannot be achieved without proper sorting of bio-waste. This study I'm presenting is building on formal research that happened already. There was the Fusions project, which actually was working on food waste and is an EU research project that detected that one of the most significant barrier concerns the way to achieve sustainable financing for socially innovative projects. So that's been already detected in this and other research. Also, the Life BioRest project, which is a great project. If you haven't heard about it, I encourage you to look it up, looks into the situation of bio-waste today in the EU. And one of the suggestions out of many others is to explore the case of EPR for food products as a way to address the challenges of food collection. So that's about bio-waste, but then why EPR for food products? I mean, if we look at a separate collection of different waste streams in the EU, and here I've gotten a bit of figures from here and from there from different years because we don't have kind of a table with updated with all the rates, but basically that gives an idea. You have here different waste streams, and if you look, there's like very different separate collection rates. The interesting thing here is that if we divide those here between those streams that have EPR and those who don't, the line is here. We see that when EPR is in place, the waste stream gets separately collected. When EPR is not in place, and I know that we have an EPR system mandated for textiles, but it's not in place. That's why the percentage is so low. Bio-waste, we have lots of legislation, but we don't have actually EPR, and I think it's already quite an achievement to achieve 26% without EPR. But I think we need to ask ourselves the question that if we really want to get the separate collection of bio-waste to get at the levels of, I don't know, packaging, for example, probably we will need to instead implement EPR. Or let's put it another way. Imagine where would we be today on the EPR, on the separate collection of packaging, if there would not be EPR for packaging. I'm sure we will not be at 60%. We will probably would be at the level of bio-waste or below. So that's on the why. Why do we need EPR for food products? I think it's important that if we are serious about bringing up collection rates and fighting food waste, we have a budget for it. Now, second part of the presentation is how would EPR for food products work? So that's research we've been doing the last months. And the study I'm presenting to you looks into which products should be included in the scope of this EPR system, who should pay for the EPR fees for the system to work, how much should be paid of the bio-waste reduction and collection costs, and what would we do with this money that is raised with the EPR fees. So that's what I'm going to present. First of all, it's important that when we look at EPR for food products, we understand that we are looking at it from a lens of bio-waste. What that means is that the money that we're going to generate with the EPR has to be sufficient to cover the cost of reducing and collecting bio-waste. It's not for other, it could be used for lots of other things, but what we are talking about here is using that money to cover the collection and the prevention of bio-waste, which is, by the way, the same approach as other EPR systems are using. So the product scope, what products would pay this EPR fee? So on the left, we have all the food produced, and And again, here we're using the food waste, the bio-waste lens, because in the beginning we have the food waste from agriculture and manufacturing processes that that's not inside this lens, so that will not be included. So we're talking here about is bio-waste. Within bio-waste, there's food waste, and there is garden waste. Garden waste, park and yard waste, etc. That is a completely different characteristic. Within food waste, we have, on one hand, solid food waste, and we have liquid food waste. So I don't need to tell you the difference between, I don't know, pasta or like fruits comparing to actually dairy, juice, etc. This is all food, but of course, from a bio-waste lens, what is collected by the municipal services is what is solid. What is liquid, some of it can end up in the bio-waste stream, but it mostly goes down with the sewage. There's an exception here that is used cooking oil. I mean, there's all the other liquid food waste, but the used cooking oils, many member states already are collecting this separately. Some of them have already even an EPR system. But for that reason, and also because of the high environmental impact of not separately collecting or actually not valorizing, and also because it has a high market value, we believe it's important to have used cooking oil. So what we suggest is to put in scope the solid food waste together with the used cooking oil as part of the EPR for food products. The rest of what is there, so other liquid food waste, garden waste, and then food loss, food waste from agriculture, etc., that would not be in the scope of what products should be included. If we look at where should this EPR fee be placed, who should pay for the EPR fee? You could place it on the producers, farmers, etc. You could place the fee on who places the food in the market. So what we are suggesting here is that to place this fee on those who actually put the product in the market, also using a similar approach as other EPR systems are using. In this case, would be the importers, the wholesalers, and retailers for their own brands, and to a certain extent, of course, if there's companies that are selling directly to retail, that would be also where the fee would be placed. So generally, how the system works, importers, wholesalers sell to retailers, and then retailers sell to HoReCa sector, hotels, cafes, restaurants, households, and yeah, what we're suggesting here is that that the fee should go to the importers, wholesalers, and retailers of own brands. What we're saying as well is, like, if food producers, in this case, the farmers market, sell directly to households, they would not be subject to this EPR fee. It's basically for the and we calculate it's around 70% of the food placed in the market is done by importers, wholesalers, and the retailers' own brands. Again, there's not very lot of information about this, so that's information we've been capturing from here and from there, and that's why I think further research would be needed. But we believe that actually placing the responsibility on those who place the food products in the market makes sense. So that's what would go in scope. Now, if we look at the cost allocation, how would this money be used? So we have bio-waste. Let's look at how the costs are allocated today. So bio-waste, as explained before, can be separated into garden waste, the food waste produced by households, and the food waste produced by HoReCa sector, hotels, restaurants, cafes. It's clear today that garden waste and food waste is paid by citizens via municipal taxes. That's yeah. If you are familiar with your city, like your municipality bills, you know that actually you're paying for the collection and treatment of this if it's separately collected. There's lots of municipalities in Europe that unfortunately they are not separately collecting food waste and garden waste, and it's again paid by the citizens via the taxes. Now, the food waste brought by hotels, restaurants, cafes normally is paid to a municipal or private waste operators, but again, it's the HoReCa sector who pays for the management of this in a way or another. That's the cost allocation today. Now let's look at what would be the cost allocation with EPR. We have the same actors here. We have garden waste, we have food waste by households, and food waste by hotels and cafes and restaurants. Garden waste, again, it's out of the scope of EPR for food products. After all, those who have a garden and generate garden waste has nothing to do with food products, and therefore that makes sense that continues to be paid like until now via taxes for the collection of garden waste. What changes here is actually the co-financing of the system with the EPR for food products. I'm talking about co-financing, and this is important because what we are suggesting is not that producers are responsible for all the costs of food products. Firstly, because as I presented before, not all food products are in the scope, but also secondly, because the costs of are already paid by citizens in a way or another. So what we're seeing here is that if, as I said before, around 70% of what the food that is placed in the market is done by importers, wholesalers, and the retailers' own brands, and we bear in mind that around 75% of all the food products are solid versus 25% being liquid, we're talking about between 50–60% of the cost would be covered by EPR by food products. So it's a co-responsibility. It's not a full responsibility. So there will still be costs by municipalities, but I think it would be a fair share to actually have this co-financing by those who place the food products in the market. Now let's look at some examples of how this would look like. There's a scenario of a small producer selling directly to consumer. Think about like I don't know, farmer selling in a farmer's market. There's no EPR fee there. The consumer just buys it directly from the farmer. In this case, there would be no EPR fee transfer. Scenario 2, there's a big producer selling to a wholesaler. The wholesaler sells to retail. The retail sells to consumer. In this case, the EPR fee would be placed on the wholesaler, who would pay the EPR fee, and then probably the EPR fee would be then passed along. Scenario 3 is a retailer own brand. Imagine like you go to a supermarket, it's selling products that they package themselves, that they produce themselves. That's where the EPR fee would go, and then the consumer would buy it from there. Scenario 4, there's an importer. We like importing food from abroad. There's that it's placed in the European market. That's where the EPR fee is placed. Then this product is sold to the retail or online platform, and then purchased by the consumer. In this case, as I said, the EPR fee goes to the importer, and then probably then it trickles down. Scenario 5, there's the retail selling own brand, selling to a small retailer, and small retail to consumer. Again, the EPR fee goes, in this case, to the retailer that is selling their own brand. And the scenario 6, the wholesaler, let's imagine a big platform selling to the hotel or restaurant, who then serves this food to the consumers. The EPR fee goes at the wholesale level, and then it's passed through. These are just some examples, but just for us to visualize actually where the EPR fee would go. And then finally, let's look at the cost coverage. So now we have collected this money, what would we pay with these EPR fees? The option 1, and that's basically consistent with the definitions that we have today in the EU legislation is what I call the traditional EPR core services, in a sense that these fees will go to finance the collection of separately collecting food waste, potentially the treatment, because that's not always the case, but the treatment, composting, pre-processing for feedstock for biomaterials, anaerobic digestion, etc. And of course, the management of the system, monitoring, reporting. Option 2, which in my opinion is we are seeing already in some EPR systems in Europe for other waste streams, and I believe it's where EU policy should go, is looking at EPR not only as a waste management funding mechanism, but actually a circularity funding mechanism. That means that actually EPR should be linked to prevention, reuse, as much as it is to recycling. And that's why, in this case, we suggest that option 2, a comprehensive EPR coverage, is used, which basically is used to, 1, finance food waste prevention initiatives, programs, etc. There's the part on the collection and treatment, the same as option 1. Litter cleanup, and here I'm talking mainly about street bins. Our research shows that between 6 and 20% of the street bins today in Europe are basically composed of food waste. Let's think about the increasing trend of eating food on the go, which means that lots of this food waste is not captured by household separate collection. It actually ends up in street bins. And in this case, we believe it's important that that's also part of the cost coverage. There's of course a monitoring, enforcement, administration of the whole system, and I think that also research and innovation could be also receive some funding from this. Again, if our aim here is to address both reduction and collection and management, option 2 makes sense. If we go only for option 1, which is the traditional EPR way, what we see is what we have seen with other EPR systems in Europe, that we are relatively good at separately collecting and recycling. We are worst at actually reusing and preventing. And that would be a pity if that were the case. How to introduce EPR for food products? This is something that could be introduced as like we have done with other waste streams. Say like, well, we mandate, the European Union could mandate, or a member state could mandate EPR to be in place. And we believe that in order for this EPR to have a direction, it's important to set a target, basically to indicate the level of performance that we want this EPR to deliver. And in this case, the EU Bio-Waste project was proposing to set targets for bio-waste and residual waste. The advantage of targets for bio-waste and residual waste over targets for separate collection of bio-waste is that by targeting bio-waste and residual waste, we target not only separate collection, but also food waste reduction, which after all is what the EU legislation says, and I think what we should be aiming at. So that would be on the how. Final considerations, and sorry for being so long. Probably a question you have is, would this EPR on food waste make food more expensive? And that's a question that is raised every time that an EPR system is proposed. We have had long conversations about this for other waste streams. What our calculations show, and what experience also shows of the last 30 years of EPR, is that the increase of EPR fees on the impact that this has on the increase of prices is very, very, very negligible. We're talking about a few cents at best. But in any case, we need to consider that we are already paying for this today. It's just today is the cities, well, basically the citizens, via the taxes that we pay to municipalities, that we are paying for these costs. So it's not a new cost. What we're talking here is actually about co-responsibility, about sharing a cost that should already exist in those places where actually this is already happening, the separate collection, I mean. Now, second one, is EPR for food products duplicating the role of pay-as-you-throw? Pay-as-you-throw is a very useful tool to incentivize citizens to generate less waste. The difference here is that pay-as-you-throw is an incentive for citizens. There's no incentive for producers. EPR for food products, actually, it's a way for producers to take co-responsibility and also to visualize actually that there's an impact into actually, I don't know, packaging food in a certain way, or like kind of pushing overconsumption. So in this case, it's not a duplication. I think it's very complementary to have EPR for food products next to pay-as-you-throw. And lastly, why EPR? Well, isn't it better to just, or simpler, to put a tax or a levy? Of course, taxes on, for example, food waste, something that could be studied. Taxes are useful, but they serve a different purpose. A tax normally goes to the general budget and is not directly allocated or earmarked for a certain service. Whereas an EPR, this is money that is raised to perform a activity, in this case, reduce and collect bio-waste. So conclusion, last slide. We believe that EPR for food products is a path that is worth looking into if we are serious about reducing food waste and increasing bio-waste separate collection, because it will help us deliver on a number of priorities for the European Union mentioned before. And after all, we are conscious of the fact that this is the first study to look into EPR for food products that we are aware of. There's not much literature on this. We are convinced it will not be the last one. We believe that this is, there's a lot of research needed still, but certainly the why we need EPR for food products, I think, is a very strong case, and hopefully it will receive the attention it deserves. With this, I conclude. I'm sure you have lots of questions, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
Jean-Marc, excellent. Thanks a lot for you to running us through that study, its goal, its findings, its challenges, its opportunities. So I think very well done. I particularly liked the great slides and, you know, simplifying things. That helps, especially for the context of that webinar. I couldn't see the slides at some point of time, but I was assured by our technical team it was apparently only me. So in case, don't worry, we will share the slides and the recording immediately after the webinar. So as you said, Jean-Marc, there is indeed a number of questions. Again, I encourage everybody to use the Q&A function of Zoom to post your questions. I think you can also see in the chat a little illustration where to find that Q&A function. It's basically at the moment at the bottom of Mark's head, Jean-Marc's head, there's, at least I see that, or below my head, there's a Q&A button. Click on it, say who you are, and please post your questions. So I will say we go by chronological order, maybe starting with the first two ones, a question from Cynthia and a question from Mark, and maybe Jean-Marc, you can take a look at those questions and see if you want to answer them. So first question from Cynthia is about the role the consumers play in this framework. Very important one. How does this EPR framework address this fact? Purchasing power, the way how we consume, buying more. So how we address this fact in the EPR framework, how we promote reduction, ensuring it's proactive than rather reactive. So that's one question. And then we have a question from Mark on cost allocation. With the co-financing, how's the 50% split of collection costs calculated as a total and verified as the 50-50 split between stakeholders? Maybe we start with those and then we can continue the others, the other questions there. Mark, you want to address those too?
Sure, yeah.
Sure.
Let's get started. Very good questions. On the first question from Cynthia, I think that EPR, and that's what it does. The role of that consumers play in this framework, after all, is the consumers need to be given the tools to do the right things, and the producers need to be given the right tools. The way I see this is that the EPR for food products is not probably the right tool to actually to incentivize reducing consumption at the consumer level. It could have that impact depending on actually the measures that the producers put in place in order to reduce the EPR fees, which then would result in the consumer having a choice that is more actually targeted at reducing food waste, but that's a bit indirect. So in my opinion, that the first question we would need, I think it's a very good question. We need more measures for consumers to do the right thing. I don't know if EPR for food products is the right one in this respect. That's for the first one. The second one, regarding the cost allocation, the 50% split, again, this is just the first study and we're doing kind of back of the envelope calculations because the data available is not very robust on this. The way I see this is the municipalities, after all, are the ones who are doing this collection, right? So they know how much it costs. So they know what bill they need to pay. And then there will be the PRO, the Producer Responsibility Organization, that would be collecting the fees from the different contributors, basically those who pay into the system. Then it would be the role of this PRO to actually to see how is that actually distributed. And again, if it's a 50% or if it's a 60, 40%, etc., is something that we need to look into. I think what is important right now is that we understand that this is a co-responsibility and that this is not like full cost coverage from the side of the producers, and it should not be full cost coverage by the side of municipalities either. So that's for me the principle. As for the first two.
Okay, perfect. Questions are coming in. As said, I mean, if we don't manage in the webinar now, we'll get back to you afterwards. But let's take a look at the questions from Finn and Teresa. So Finn is asking, in addition to the, in quotation marks, final considerations, I assume the final considerations of your presentation, are there other frequent concerns raised against EPR for food products? That's one question. And then Teresa asks, how can EPR for food products help with the collection and recycling of other waste streams from households?
Yeah, very good. The question from Finn, there's not been very frequent concerns because I think it's quite a new topic. So very few people have raised concerns on something that for the moment was not on the table. I think the concerns are going to come now, and we were actually very interested in actually listening to them. A general question I've been asked is why EPR on food products and not on food waste? Because after all, right, we're targeting food waste, and I think that's been probably like the reason why we haven't had EPR for food products, because EPR on food waste is extremely difficult to actually to conceptualize and to implement. Whereas EPR for food products, kind of, it's easier. So I would say, yes, that's an open question. Let's look at, we're interested in actually like hearing feedback about like what people think about the concerns should be. To reply to Teresa, EPR for food products, we believe, can have a positive impact in actually increasing the collection and recycling of other waste streams. How is that? And again, that's related to the 65% recycling goal that the EU has for 2035. As I said, 30 to 40% of municipal solid waste is bio-waste. Bio-waste is the fraction that actually, it's, as you know, it smells, it's more putrescible, it goes bad more quickly, and therefore it requires more frequent collection, which has its associated costs. If we don't separately collect it, that means that we need to increase the collection frequency for all the waste streams because it's all mixed up, and the value of the other recyclables goes down because they need to be washed, cleaned, etc. If we manage with EPR for food products to get the bio-waste out of the other waste streams, we're actually going to increase the profitability and the actually environmental performance of separate collection and recycling of other waste streams. So it's a win-win. It would really help actually unblock circularity in the EU.
Thank you, Jean-Marc, for that. In case of participants wonder what happened to Mirabella from the European Commission, she had to go to her next meeting, so she is excused, but we will, of course, continue with the other questions. So I take questions from Fotis and from Alba now. So Fotis is referring to the Greek government proposing the polluter pays principle as part of the making HoReCa require producer responsibility organizations for their bio-waste, talking about court challenges and possible defeat scenarios. But the question is, what is the solution to this conundrum? Do we need EU legislation? Mark, if you can make sense out of that question, please give it a try. And then Alba says, what do you expect to do with the product results from collected bio-waste? Do you expect this product is going to be, have positive price?
Yeah. So the first question from Fotis, maybe to contextualize a bit, something I didn't say in my presentation is that the only EPR for food products that is being considered right now in the world that I'm aware of is in Greece, but it's an EPR that actually is looking to place the responsibility somewhere differently. So whereas we are proposing to put the responsibility on those who place the food product in the market, the Greek system is looking into having the HoReCa system actually pay for this EPR fee. So I don't have an answer to the question, but what I would add to, but I do think that we are going to start to have to deal with this in different countries, which speaks in favor of actually having an European approach. Because if in Greece they decide to set an EPR system that actually makes the HoReCa sector responsible, and then, I don't know, take another country and they decide to put it somewhere else, etc. And then 10 years from now, the European Union decides to intervene and harmonize this, it's going to be extremely difficult. So I think that only speaks in favor for actually the EU setting at least some harmonized way to look at EPR for food products, because otherwise it's going to go really bad for the single market on this front. So that's for the first question. The question from Alba, the EPR for food products actually should make the system financially sustainable and should allow for economies of scale. Certainly, we're going to have more bio-waste separately collected. We're going to have more available feedstock for biomaterials, for compost, etc. I don't think that means necessarily that the bio-waste is going to have a positive price, although for used oils, for example, it clearly would. So again, it probably depends on what type of bio-waste, but again, that's something that should be further researched.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I can see there's some anonymous attendees. Actually, to be honest, I'm a favor of being transparent here when you ask questions. So please identify yourself if you want to have your questions addressed. If you feel uncomfortable, reach out to us or Jean-Marc with that question. But I think we are transparent about who's asking which questions. So going to Piotr. The question on, do you think that some of the EPR funding can go to help establishing home composting? That's one question. And then there is a question I would like to take from Jean-Baptiste, talking about new food products. To be honest, I'm not sure what you refer to new food products, maybe Jean-Marc is. So the question is, has consideration been given to the possibility of imposing fees not on new food products, but on harmful products. So turning the point around, so talking about chemical fertilizers, fossil-based products to be considered as harmful products, than rather the other way around. So maybe you could address those two.
Yeah, very good questions, which I think actually goes into the debate that we want to have. Should this EPR for food products actually finance home composting? Why not? For now, we are not considering it, but it could. But again, that depends on the negotiations, and it might be that in some countries it makes sense, in some others it doesn't. But for sure, it's something that could be considered. The same answer can be applied to the question from Jean Baptiste, which in a way is, should we eco-modulate the EPR fees according to actually how healthy, how energy intensive, how whatever the food product is? And the answer is yes, potentially we can. That's going to make the system more complex, but that's part of a negotiation, a discussion that is worth having. Why not? For the moment, our proposal has on purpose tried to be very simple, because we try to build the foundations. But yeah, an eco-modulation along the lines that you propose, it's possible if there's political will for it.
Perfect. Thanks. So more and more questions coming in. We have around 10, 12 minutes to go through. So I see a question from Rosie, if I pronounced her name correctly. Sorry if I don't. How can EPR systems be designed to clearly allocate responsibility across sectors, avoiding cost shifting or free riding, and ensure that prevention and separate collections are effectively delivered at all stages? And then I see a question from Keith. Where's the question? A lot of abbreviations. So how, well, as interim measures, sorry, maybe we start with the one from Rosie, and then I try to see what's the question from Keith. So we'll come back to you, Keith.
Okay.
1 second. Yeah.
Sure. So we can get, thanks, Rosie, for the question. What you're asking basically is a question that applies to an EPR system. So it's a very valid question, and it's important actually to avoid cost shifting, free riding, etc. How we do that, and at Zero Waste Europe we have been providing recommendations for all the waste streams, is by actually setting up well-designed EPR systems where the definitions are clear, the competencies are clear, responsibilities, and basically that's something that, as part of the harmonization of EPR principles exercise that the European Union is already doing, is something we could build on that. We don't need to invent, I think, new tools. EPR as a tool is quite widely developed in the European Union. I'm not saying it's going to be easy for EPR for food products. Part of the reason why we have gone for actually wholesalers, importers, is because there are less of those than actually going after, I don't know, say like retailers, because there would be a lot more. But yeah, the answer is that EPR is not the solution if it's not designed properly. And we know how to design EPR properly. And Europe is full of good and bad examples of EPR implementation, so we can learn from those. Okay,
thanks for that. Okay, I read Keith's question or point again. So it's about while in the meantime we should make use of community improvement district measures, CID. So the CID can that be paid as a fee by the manufacturer, producer, or retailer within the CID area? So before we go to the whole bigger geographical level, can we do that at community level? That's how I see the question. And then from Piotr, food consumption is also linked to sewage systems. Should they also receive the EPR funds to stop support their operations, if I read this correct? If not, please clarify, Piotr and Keith, if I got your questions wrong.
Yeah. So the question from Keith, I think what you are suggesting is potentially feasible at a local level, and why not? And I think that can be done with or without EPR for food products. It can be an interim measure, but honestly, I think it's something that can happen with or without EPR for food products. Whether we want to see it as an interim measure, why not? It could actually build the but yeah, again, it depends on the local politics. If we could actually get a proper framework for this to happen at the right scale and right level, I think it would have a proper impact on society. Because if we go like in a very like micro way, we're not going to get the economies of scale and also the access to the feedstock that we need in order to have also big processes going at scale. Mm-hmm. And on the question from Piotr, that's a valid point. Of course, there's lots of food that goes through the sewage systems. Whether and again, when writing the study, we thought about, but maybe, yeah, we could include liquid food waste and finance part of the sewage wastewater treatment with that. We know that some of the food waste actually goes through the sewage as well. I think that that's up for conversation. I think, again, it makes sense to discuss it. It adds complexity, but I would not rule it out. I mean, but maybe that's for a next stage. It's interesting to know that the EPR for actually some harmful substances in sewage is already in place in the European Union. So why not expanding on that and trying to incorporate this? That would actually make also the cost of running the sewage systems a bit more affordable. But again, I think it's an option that I would leave open, and then we'll see.
Good. Thanks, Jean-Marc. We have a couple of minutes ago. I take 4 questions here, and I think then we would stop. If you have an urgent question, please do it now, but because we need to finish the seminar. So Mark, Tony, Karalampos, Estefania, and Maximilian, and then we'll stop here. So Mark, it's about the contamination in food waste streams. How are those cleaning costs being included in the EPR scheme, or are they included? Question 1. Then we have a question from Tony on different values for bio waste. How can this be reflected? For example, that fresh vegetables are more costly than, say, fats and dairies, which are thought for gas. The question from Karalampos, if I pronounce correctly, is there any kind of awareness campaign or similar planned in the EU or member state level, as far as you know, if it comes to the contribution of consumers and supporting and being essential and critical in that effort? The obvious question, I think, and a good one from Estefania, how do you think the Circular Economy Act could take this idea on board on EPRs and food waste? And then last one from Maximilian from Foodrise. What do you think are the biggest political obstacles to implementing that, and how do we address them? Maybe also a word on the gaps we need to fill on the research side and on the argumentation side. So thanks for those. Jean-Marc, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, all very easy questions. Thank you so much. To Mark. Yes, sometimes food waste can be contaminated with other materials. And I think that speaks to actually designing well-performing separate collection schemes. So we know that in Europe, we have separate collection schemes that achieve less than 3% contamination. We also know that there's food waste, bio waste separate collection schemes that work with 20% contamination. I think for economic and environmental reasons, it makes sense that we actually set the conditions for actually aiming at having all Europe running on efficient systems that have less than 5%, if possible, less than 3% contamination. It makes the system cheaper. It makes it better for those who are going to use the feedstock later on, etc. So I hope the EPR for food products would be a way to actually have the financial incentives to set up highly performing systems that address these questions, so that we don't need to deal with contaminated food waste streams, which of course yeah, you spend the money for the collection, it's badly done, then the processing is bad also because you need to clean it. That's not what we want. We want to have actually very pure feedstocks, and for that, I think EPR for food products could help. The question from Tony, true, different food wastes have different values for biowaste depending on what you want to do. Again, that's it's a very valid question, and I think that would open a very interesting conversation as to whether you want to eco-modulate, as I said before, or how do you want to play this? Are you trying to influence the food products place in the market? Are we trying to allocate the fees according to how useful the food product will be from a waste perspective and not from a product perspective? That is a very interesting conversation to be had that I hope actually we can have in the coming months if this topic is in the agenda. But for sure, as I said, we try to propose a system that is simple, and for the moment, it's everybody pays the same and everybody receives the same. That's probably the simplest there is. Then we can make it more complex from there. The question from Chara Lampos. Wait a second. That was the next one. Yes. The contribution of consumers is critical and essential. Absolutely. So we are trying to, of course, as Zero Waste Trio will try to mobilize citizens and anybody who is interested in actually having this conversation and pushing this topic in the coming months. So if you're interested, please reach out to us and we will see actually how we can collaborate on that front. For the moment, as far as we know, EPR for food products, since it's a new topic, there's nobody pushing for it. We will change that. To a question from Stefania, the Circular Economy Act is coming up end of this year, and as the Commission has said before, EPR is a key part of it. It's basically the tool to finance the most of the collection of stuff that Europe badly needs in these times of actually strategic autonomy and competitiveness. So we hope that as part of the EPR proposals from the European Commission, harmonization, creating basically the baseline to make sure that we can take advantage of the single market, EPR for food products can be part of the proposals. And if we get enough support, why not even hopefully mandate it? We need to bear in mind that if we want to meet the target of food waste reduction of 2030 and the target for separate collection, of recycling for 2035, we cannot wait a long time before really speeding up and scaling up separate collection and reduction policies. If we want to meet the target by 2030, we will need this EPR for food products to be in place in the next 2 years to give us time to actually act. And the same is true for separate collection. So I hope that the issue is taken seriously and we can have it legislated soon. And then last question from Max. The biggest political obstacles is, well, as I said, this is the first study of this kind. I think we need to look more into the details. Lots of you have raised very valid questions that deserve really looking into them. We need to see how the different players actually see this opportunity. And for me, the obstacle or the opportunity here is, if we don't go for EPR for food products, what is our plan to achieve the reduction targets and the separate collection targets? Because we know that without a push, and if it's a push from the financing side, it's better, not much is going to happen and we're going to miss the targets. So I imagine, and we have seen it in the comments, that those who will be having to pay will not like this. It's understandable. We need to have this conversation. Again, it's not a full cost coverage. We're talking about co-responsibility. It's happening in other waste streams. Why not have the same as we have in other waste streams? In the most important, is basically bio-waste is, as I said, 30 to 40% by weight of all municipal solid waste. It only makes sense. So I hope we can continue this conversation in the coming months and build power to make this happen. Thank you, Marco. Over to you.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. No, I think that was a good transition, let's say, to concluding that webinar here today, because I think we achieved one of the key objectives with putting out this study, in the sense of bringing some substance and facts to the table, kickstarting the discussions. We can see from the questions from the audience that certainly there is more considerations and additional points to address, but I think that's why it's good that we had Mirabella with here to us to give us the general context. We have Jean-Marc presenting the study and thankfully answering all the questions in preciseness. But I think also thanks to you and all the participants for being with us today. For those questions we cannot answer, we'll get back to you. Please also, Anonymous Anti, you have a very valid question, but please reach out to us so we can discuss that. I think it's a really important to do that. So with that being said, from my side, from the Bio-Based Industries Consortium side, I would really like to thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time. And thanks for staying with us and continuing the discussions on EPR for food waste. So that would be from my side. Jean-Marc, anything to add to conclude, please?
Well, thanks to you, Marco, for facilitating this, and to the Bio-Based Industries Consortium for the collaboration with this. And we're looking forward to starting this conversation with all of you who actually want to bring this issue forward. Thank you very much.
All right. Then thank you and have a good day, everybody.